US President Joe Biden has launched his 2024 re-election bid. His approval ratings are down and he's already the oldest president in US history, but with a lack of formidable opponents from his own party and Donald Trump representing the Republicans, can he secure a second term? I'm Yashni Padiachi and today's newsmaker is Biden's re-election bid. Next year, Americans will line up to vote in the presidential elections. There'll be déjà vu for voters who will most likely choose between Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. In 2020, Biden beat Trump by winning the Electoral College. He also bested Trump by more than 7 million votes nationally. But Biden's electioneering was run widely from home as COVID-19 circulated. Experts say this time, though, the 80-year-old will likely need to rely more on Democratic surrogates, including Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Barack Obama, to weather the coming campaign.
U.S. President Joe Biden has kicked off his re-election campaign, and he's asking Americans to give him 4 more years in the White House to finish the job.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are.
With his running mate Kamala Harris, he promises to protect American democracy from who he calls Republican extremists.
But you know, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms.
Biden is now all set for a 2024 rematch with his top rival, former President Donald Trump. The Republican frontrunner announced his bid last November and was quick to respond with a video of his own blasting Biden.
Thanks to Joe Biden's socialist spending calamity, American families are being decimated by the worst inflation in half a century. Banks are failing, our currency is crashing, and the dollar will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat in over 200 years.
And even warned of a global catastrophe.
Russia is teaming up with China. Iran is days away from a nuclear bomb, not even thinkable. Ukraine has been devastated by an invasion that would never, ever have happened if I was president.
Biden might face a struggle to retain the presidency in a bitterly divided nation, but he's hoping his first-term achievements will count.
Like I said, we've created 12 million new jobs. We've created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. We have economic growth moving. We're in a situation where the climate, we've invested more money and more help in dealing with the climate crisis than any nation in the world. And so things are moving.
But the ratings paint a different picture. The president's approval fell to 39% this month, almost the lowest level of his presidency. Many cite the president's age as the main reason why. He is already the oldest president in American history, and if he were to win, he would leave the White House at 86 years old. That's a decade higher than the average U.S. male's life expectancy.
I don't think he needs to run. I think he's way too old. I think there needs to be an age limit, because I think as you age, your capacities aren't where they should be.
Perhaps his 50 years of experience in Washington will mean more for voters. But is Biden the right Democrat to keep the indicted and twice impeached former president from recapturing the White House? And are Americans ready to give him another chance?
And repeat after me.
Joining me now to discuss all of this from Munich, Germany, is Candice Kerestan, the international head of Democrats Abroad. In Washington, D.C. is Adolfo Franco, a Republican strategist and Donald Trump's former campaign lawyer. And in London is Iwan Morgan, an Emeritus Professor of United States History at University College London. A warm welcome to all of you for this Newsmakers episode. Candice, I'm going to start with you. And one of the issues that everyone has been talking about is Joe Biden's age. And you could say that age ain't nothing but a number, but this is a big number. How important is it going to be when it comes to him trying to be re-elected?
So I think the thing that is front and center and most important for voters is the person in the White House delivering for the American people and delivering for our country at large. And Joe Biden is doing exactly that. In relation to age, it is important to remember that we're looking for someone who could get the job done. And the thing with Joe Biden's age is, too, he may be older. That also means that he has the experience needed to lead our country. And he's also creating spaces for younger people, people from minority communities to come along with him. And I would even put myself in that group as a young leader in the Democratic Party. He has created space for us, pulled us into the party, pulled us into politics, and we're excited.
Adolfo, what's your take on that? Because if this all does come down to a card where it's Biden versus Trump, both men are older, so possibly not much of a difference here for voters.
Well, I think Candice got it right. It's the record that counts here. I think that's salient. I'm surprised starting out with the age issue. Obviously, the president is cognitively challenged. Anyone who sees him and takes of him 10, 15 years ago can see that he is a person, unfortunately, because of his age, that is showing his age. But here's the key. The record that Candice was talking about. You have 72% of the American people that say he shouldn't be running because of the economy and the record that he has. We have 23 months of 5% above inflation. These are the worst poll numbers of any president since polling started with President Truman. You have fully 51% of Democrats saying that he should not be running. You have a majority of the American people, 54%, who say 72% who should not be running, and he has approval ratings of about 36 to 41%, depending on the polls. Why is this? You have an economic situation in the country that is dismal. You have an immigration policy and an out-of-control border. That's the record. You have a fiasco in Afghanistan. You have a figurehead president who is really pursuing a leftist agenda that was given to him. So when you have this totality, you have one of the most unpopular presidents in American history. Who announces their reelection in a 3-minute video in the middle of the morning, 6 a.m. in the morning? President Reagan called it morning in America. This is nighttime in America for Joe Biden. He hid for the 2020 campaign in the basement. He can't hide from his record, a dismal record.
Ewan, what do you make of that? What do you make of Joe Biden's record so far as U.S. president compared to others?
Well, he has the lowest approval rating in the April before the election year of every president of the last 50 years, with the exception of Jimmy Carter, Donald Trump, and indeed somebody who was just mentioned, Ronald Reagan. So that's the problem for him. Also, something like 2/3 of people polled feel that the country is on the wrong track, both economically, in terms of crime, in terms of immigration. That said, the economy is not in such a bad shape. In fact, 2 weeks ago, The Economist headlined its issue, the American economy is riding high, remarkably high compared to the economies of other countries. Unemployment is at its lowest level since 1969. Yes, inflation went up, but now it's on the way down. This hasn't translated into a feel-good factor yet for Biden, but I don't think the economy is necessarily going to hurt him if it continues at the present level.
Candice, let me come to you now about that, because when it comes to low polling, this could be pivotal for Joe Biden. But also within the Democratic Party, besides Biden, who's his competition? If not him, who else?
So the party is 100% behind Biden. We have seen elected officials, other candidates, other former candidates, that is, come together from really all ends of the party and say, we are united behind Joe Biden. in his candidacy. So in terms of, what is actually happening within the party, and also what I'm seeing as I work with US and dual citizens all around the world and within the United States, it is that we are standing behind President Biden. He does, just to counter my Republican right there for a second, he does have a record to run on. There have been massive necessary changes that Joe Biden, for better or for worse, was handed after walking into a disaster of a White House in early 2021. I mean, imagine yourself, right, walking into the White House and that office after someone like Donald Trump had just been in it. So, of course, the level of things that needed to get done, the quantity of things that needed to get done was higher. And he has risen to the challenge. He has introduced economic transformation that isn't just for the 1%, but is, looking for an equitable, just economic system. And that's a massive change. And I like his bold change, and I know that the American people do too.
And Ewan, historically, presidents do win their second bid at re-election. What are Biden's chances here, if we just look at it from a historical perspective, and also as someone who, he has said himself, he wants to continue his policies and he needs another 4 years to be able to do that?
Well, incumbency is a very strong factor. There's no doubt about that. In the last 100 years, only 4 presidents, elected presidents, I'm excluding Gerald Ford here, but only 4 presidents in the last 100 years have lost bids for re-election. Herbert Hoover in 1932, Jimmy Carter in 1980, George H.W. Bush in 1992, and Donald Trump in 2020. And the common factor in all 4 cases was that the economy was tanking on their watch, and they got turfed out for economic mismanagement. That's why the economy is such a vital factor for Biden. He can't do anything about his age, but he can do something about the economy.
Yeah, money matters no matter which country you're in. Adolfo, I want to come to you for this because when we look at the Republican candidates, most people are thinking it's going to be Donald Trump. But if it isn't Donald Trump, is Ron DeSantis the next strongest candidate?
Well, before I answer that, I have to correct a couple of things. The first is this idea of the economist and the leftist press. That is the Biden constituency, by the way, that the economy is rosy and that's great and bullish and so forth. Ask any American that. Look, they're not feeling the pain. You're as the guest here saying it's getting better. Gasoline prices are radically on the rise. We don't have the oil reserves because he hasn't replenished them. We have OPEC cutting production. We have a projection of a recession in this country. So I don't care what the economists or the other guests say. The reality is otherwise, despite the liberal press. Now, my friend here on the Democratic side was speaking about Donald Trump. You know, President Reagan said something in 1980. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And I want to ask every American who's watching this, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And the answer, of course, and the polling data suggests it, your guests were even saying it, by huge numbers, the answer is absolutely no. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel because these policies are failed policies. These policies are huge government spending. These policies have absolutely nothing to do with the working class. They're hurting people. Real wages are down in the United States as compared to inflation. That's the record he has. Now, the Republican candidate, it doesn't matter if it's Mr. DeSantis or Mr. Trump or anybody else. We're going to run on the Biden record. He's going to say what he said in his own reelection clip. I'm better than the alternative. I'm not the almighty. He can't defend a record. What did he say in his 3 minutes that he accomplished? There is nothing this man has accomplished except divide the country, something he said he was not going to do, vicious name calling to half of the American people or more about their political views, and giving us 80,000 more IRS agents.
Those are Adolfo,
his
sorry to cut you in there.
One last thing for your guest. Do you realize that Robert Kennedy Jr. has announced for Democratic president of the United States? Candice said that they're all united. He hasn't done anything, and he has 14% approval. 14% in the polls. He hasn't done a thing. He has 14%, Robert Kennedy against Biden Trump. against Biden for the nomination. Can you imagine what that represents for Biden in terms of support in his party? It's very soft. I'll leave it one last comment on your Democratic unity. Senator Manchin, a well-known Democrat in this country, has said that Mr. Biden has a deficiency of leadership. That's this week. This is the Democratic senator, a key senator, who said he will vote to repeal the Biden Build Back bill.
But Adolfo, surely all Republicans can't be united either, because
they're united against Joe Trump, against Joe Biden.
And Biden, as you were saying, he was just disparaging Republicans. It's a two-way street. Both sides disparage each other.
Well,
that's part of
if I could jump in,
Candice, please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Candice.
Thanks, Adolfo. If I could just jump in,
I am speaking about a record. Candice, I am speaking about a record.
Okay,
you're speaking over me right now.
Let's just try to get the views from both sides here. So, Candice, continue with what you are trying to say.
Thank you. There was a lot to unpack there, without a doubt. And, after being interrupted and spoken over so much, I've actually lost my train of thought. But that goes back to, again, Robert Kennedy entering the race. That's not what we're here to talk about. Those are not within the Democratic Party, okay? Those are not within the Democratic Party. The fact of the matter is, now I remember, Adolfo, when you said, ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Yes.
And the answer with that is absolutely. As Americans living outside the United States for the past 4 years, when Donald Trump was president, people will spend every single day worried, waking up, checking the news to know what off-the-rail thing the president had said, what geopolitical crisis the president had unlaunched. We don't have that now. Thank God. We have stability, we have leadership, we have compassion coming from the White House. And I can tell you one other thing, and that is that when it comes to stirring the pot and name-calling and inflaming division in our country, that is single-handedly coming from Mar-a-Lago, Florida.
MAGA extremist, fascist, attack on democracy, about 55% of the American people. You hadn't even answered your question. You're better off than you were 4 years ago. You ask any American buying groceries. You ask any American putting gasoline. Are you better off?
Okay, Candice and Adolfo. I think many people and many countries around the world, post-COVID, governments have had to do a lot to try to stabilize economies. We've had the war in Ukraine. The whole world is feeling the effects of the last few years, including America, of course, being such an important part of that. What happens in America affects the rest of the world. So Ewan, I'd like to bring you in here, because having listened to Candice and Adolfo, when the world looks at what's happening in the United States, what is the general consensus? Are people better off, or are the rest of us experiencing very much what the United States is going through? Tough economies, inflation, food crises, and continued wars in various parts of the world.
Well, if you're comparing the United States with Britain, or indeed most of Western Europe, and if you ask me who's got the better economy, by a good stretch, I'd say it's the US. So in that regard, I have to challenge our Republican colleague. I'm also surprised, and the economists would also be surprised to be classified, that the economists have been classified as a left-wing magazine. However, be that as it may, the economy will be a factor in 2024. There will be other issues, and one of the big issues that is going to hurt the Republicans is going to be abortion. Their stand on abortion, their support, the Supreme Court decision of last year is highly unpopular. And this is an election in a very polarized society. I think one thing we can be certain of, it is going to be a very close fought election in the same way as 2020 and 2016 were. And there are going to be 6 to 8 states, the swing states, where the election is won or lost. And if you go back to 2018, 2020 and 2022, the Democrats were doing well in most of these swing states, like Pennsylvania, like Michigan, like Arizona, like Georgia. Florida is going to go red, no problems. Texas is going to go red. That's countered by New York and California, but those swing states are where it matters. And I think a candidate like Biden, who doesn't frighten people, has the edge.
So, Candice, what is Biden's campaign strategy? Yeah, he is, of course, the incumbent, slightly easier for him. But as we heard there from you, an issue like abortion is going to be a big one, especially among younger voters.
In my opinion, the strongest thing that he can do is keep doing a good job while he's in office. We have elected him to this position. He has delivered, and he is going to continue to deliver. And that is the strongest message and campaign strategy that there is. So from my opinion, it's keep doing the job and doing it well. And if we're talking about women's rights, again, we have already seen bold commitments coming out of the White House and the entire Democratic caucus in terms of our commitments to protecting and expanding reproductive justice, reproductive health care. And to go back, to what's 2024 going to look like, let's look back to this past November. The red wave that was supposed to materialize never did. We were supposed to lose seats in the Senate. We were supposed to get slaughtered in the House. We picked up a seat in the U.S. Senate, which is unheard of, in a midterm while you have the White House. So voters have made a very clear statement that they are not for the Republican Party. They are not for having their rights stripped away. And this isn't unique just to the battleground states. We have very red states. If you look at Kansas, there was a referendum last August in a state like Kansas, rural Midwestern America, overwhelmingly supporting Democratic stances. And that was a strong indicator for this past November, where all of Trump's candidates, nearly all of his candidates, didn't just lose, but decisively lost. So the Republican Party needs to wake up.
Okay, Adolfo, let me bring you in here. Now, I know you're dying to say something to respond to Candice, but also to speak about the polarization the United States is facing. It's possibly at its most polarized ever. So whoever wins in November next year, that surely needs to be very high on the agenda, trying to unify a nation of more than 300 million people.
Well, that was the case in 2020, and the so-called unifier divided it more. The country's more divided now than it was 3 or 4 years ago, thanks to Joe Biden's failed policies. I hope the Democratic Party takes Candice's advice, keep going what they're doing. I don't know if they're looking at the polling data, but you have the vast majority of the American people who disapprove of this president, who disapprove of these policies. So I guess keep going with this disastrous policy, including your own party that has trepidation about this. So I hope that's the advice that is taken. There is polarization thanks to Joe Biden's divisiveness on this program. This program is a good example of this. Yes, The Economist is a leftist publication. And no, my friend, American voters don't care how other countries are doing economically. They care about their pocketbook in this country, what they're paying for gasoline, what they're paying for groceries, the censorship, the wokeness. He has one vote. He has the media vote, Joe Biden, which he will use to his advantage to try to hide from a record. You cannot defend this record. There is no way this record can be defended with the American people. He's already laid out his strategy, which is his strategy is I'm better than the alternative. He has nothing to offer. He is unfortunately cognitively challenged. He will avoid a debate. He will avoid appearances. He will avoid press conferences. And no, Candice, the Republicans took the House of Representatives, for your information. And no, this is not unprecedented. There have been in the past, in 1998, Democrats did well. In 2002, in midterms, Republicans did well. So in its totality, you have to look at a president who has failed. He is our Jimmy Carter of this generation on foreign policy and on domestic policy.
Okay, Ewan, I'm going to leave it now with you, because seeing as more of a neutral voice in this. Who do you think is going to be the candidates for next year? And who do you think the American people are going to put their money on?
Well, I fear that the polarization situation in the United States is very bad. It may have got worse under Biden, but it was pretty bad before. And we've only got to look at the 6th of January 2021 to remind ourselves of how bad it was under Donald Trump. Now, I think that Biden doesn't frighten voters in the same way that Trump does. Even if you get a Trump-like like DeSantis running, his record in Florida is vulnerable to the kind of issues that get Democrats to the ballot box.
Too leftist.
I'm assuming if at the current situation, if nothing dramatically different happens, I'd say that Biden has a better chance, not a much better chance, than any Republican candidate of winning the election. But
it's going to
that's
be
a prediction.
very interesting to see how all of this plays out. We're going to have to leave it there. Candice Kerestan, Adolfo Franco, and Iwan Morgan, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for watching. You can follow us on Twitter, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Yashni Padiachi. Take care. Goodbye.